Okay, today I'm going to do chapter 9, Church of the East, with you. And this is factors in the decline of the Church of the East, which I think gets to an interesting part for us. So, the spread and persecution by the Muslims was one of the reasons for the decline of the Church of the East, which I think we were probably all aware of. It is said that the Patriarch of Seleucia entered into an agreement with Muhammad in 638 through 43. The prophet promised safety to all Christians who lived in his dominion and guaranteed them religious freedom. In return, the Christians promised him loyalty and obedience and support if an enemy attacked. This pledge, however, did nothing to prevent persecution by Muhammad's successors. And this says, in Persia, the Muslims did not persecute Christians as much as their Arabian counterparts did, yet the Christians still dealt with the confiscation of part or whole of their property, which decreased the number of new converts. The Christians either turned to Islam or emigrated to other countries. So as time went on, the attitude of the Muslim rulers toward the Christians became more harsh. One caliph ordered Jews and Christians to adopt customs different from the Muslims. And the Muslims built their first mosque in AD 712 in Uzbekistan. And despite being a very large city, there was no need for a second mosque until AD 771. Even then, the majority of the people were actually opposed to Islam. So we're in, 6 and 700s, they're still opposed to it. But a more serious persecution started in AD 847-61. The Muslims ordered the Christians to wear a distinctive dress, dismissed them from government employee, and forbade them to ride on horseback. They also destroyed any church built after the Arab conquest and turned the houses of some of the wealthy Christians into mosques. The government could not function without the Christians, however, so after each outburst, they returned to their government offices. From AD 987 onward, the Caliph nominated and supported the Patriarch of Baghdad, whether or not the metropolitans approved. Remember, the metropolitans were the Catholic leadership. An index of Arabian books in every branch of knowledge was prepared in AD 988, and literature was written in Arabic. Even the Eastern Church and Jacobite Christians began to use Arabic in preference to Syriac. Scientific and philosophic works were translated from Greek into Arabic. By the end of the 10th century, however, the unity of Islam, both politically and as a religious force, had been considerably weakened. So it had picked up and now it had weakened. And in AD 1042, the Turks began a mass movement toward Islam. And when I lived in Turkey, it was about 99% plus were Muslim. In one town, 5,000 to 10,000 inhabitants converted to Islam. Some Turks left their home and entered the service of the Caliph, attracted by the prospect of plunder. Indifferent to Islam or even hostile to it when at home, in Persia they viewed it merely as part of their military discipline and submitted to its religious rule. So it wasn't really about faith, it was just about tradition and what they, and that is still the case in a lot of Muslim countries today, where they say they're Muslim, but it's very, they're just sort of following along. They don't really have a relationship with Christ. Kind of like Christians in the South, right? They say we're Christian, but they're actually just a Christian because their parents were or whatever. But then the Mongols began to convert to Islam. This brought fresh support and saved Islam from destruction by the Crusaders. In the late AD 1000s, a bigoted Muslim put a large iron collar on the neck of every Christian who refused to convert. Muslims were the majority of merchants and lived along the trade routes. There were mosques in nearly every town along these routes, and in some places, Muslims occupied all the positions of authority, although most of the population was non-Muslim. If Christians had control of the city, the Muslim merchants had to pay taxes. So if there was a city that the Christians had control. For the Turks and Mongols, the nation came first, and Christians and pagans united in common loyalty to their country. Christianity did not weaken one's sense of nationality, however. When the Turks and Mongols became Muslims, religion was put first. Creating converts was their duty and a way to earn a reward from God. The larger the number of Christians they could turn to Islam, the greater the reward. To understand how these converts to Islam became the most fanatical supporters and were an important factor in the decay of the Church of the East is easy. And this on the bottom says, in the early 1900s, a scholar found a charter of protection granted to the Nestorian Church in AD 1138. It stated that in granting the charter, he is simply following the steps of all the previous caliphs. Based on this document, the scholar declared that, however imperfect official Islam may have been in some social aspects, statutory intolerance was not among its defects. However, although the document may reflect the attitude of that particular caliph, no one familiar with the history of the Muslim expansion would believe that it correctly describes the general attitude of Muslim rulers toward Christianity, or that the rise of Islam furthered the interests of the Eastern Church's missionary enterprise at all. So when the Muslims attempted to reach into the southern India, other forces checked their advance. First the Dutch, then the French, then the English. The decay of Christianity in central and northern India was mainly the result of the Muslims, even as late as 1784. So we're talking, not that long ago as far as history is concerned. The Muslim ruler of the southern tip of India forcibly circumcised between 30 and 50,000 Christians and removed them to the country above the Western Ghats. He compelled the Christians to embrace Islam, lest he cut off their ears and noses. It is impossible for us to know how many of the ancestors of the Muslims on India's west coast were originally Christians who became Muslims under similar compulsion. And so it says even as late as 1896, they were forcibly converting Christians to Islam. And that's basically what that summarizes in saying. Okay, this section is called Deception, and it says one contributing factor to the decline in Eastern Church missionary activity, especially in India, was the alleged deceptions by the Brahmins. There are two deceptions in particular. So there's two kind of legends, deceptions. The first is called the Asoka legend. In India, one of the best legendary characters connected with Buddhism is Asoka. His edicts are found inscribed on pillars and rocks scattered over an area that extends from northern Pakistan, almost the southern tip of India, and West India. His edicts are all over. He supposedly wrote them in 257 to 232 before Christ. Asoka is supposed to have ruled over the greater part of India as part of the Maurya dynasty, ultimately becoming a member of the Buddhist priesthood, and he carried the Buddhist doctrine so far to far-off countries. Apart from the rock and pillar inscriptions, however, we know little either of him or his dynasty. One scholar argues that Asoka and his kingdom never existed. There are internal historical inconsistencies within the inscriptions and various difficulties with their letter formations. All the evidence suggests that the edicts originated 4 centuries later than the legend suggests, in the 3rd century, so hundreds of years after Christ. Furthermore, the scholar suggests that the Brahmins of central India created the edicts in order to check the rapid spread of Christianity throughout their territories. However, not content with the fabrication of the Asoka edicts, perhaps because they'd failed to accomplish their desired ends, the Brahmins next invented various avatars of Vishnu and the Krishna legend. So now we're into another bit of deception, where the avatars of Vishnu, where some scholars claim that the Brahmins invented modern Hindu astronomy in AD 538. These Brahmins were capable of discounting the Christians since they were the only scholars in the country and had enormous influence. Seeing that the Christians acknowledged that Christ was an incarnation of the deity and that God the Father had sent him down to earth to show special favor to men and to redeem them from sin, the Brahmins invented not one but several incarnations and descents of the deity as having taken place among them at various times, thereby making it appear that they exceeded the Christians and all the nations by far in point of favor of the deity. These descents of the deity are known as avatar. So Krishna probably meant to further halt the progress of Christianity with the story of creation, which included the incarnation and birth. The Brahmins were concerned that they would lose both their influence and income if they could not stop Christianity, so they attempted to make Krishna and Christ the same character. So they were confusing Christian followers by tying the religions together. The two have names that sound alike, similar parts of their biographies, and comparable precepts. If Krishna and Christ seemed the same, the Brahmins could dissuade Hindus from becoming Christians. Therefore, as Christ and Krishna were one and the same deity, it would be ridiculous for the Hindus, being already of the true faith, to follow the imperfect doctrines of a set of outcasts who had not only forgotten the religion of their forefathers, but the country from which they originally sprang. In order to further dissuade any possible converts to Christianity, the Brahmins would quote Krishna in the Gita: "A man's own religion, though contrary to, is better than the faith of another. Let it ever be so followed." There are examples of the similarities between Krishna and Christ in both the story of Krishna's life and in the word choices of the Gita. Here are a few examples from the life of Krishna. The foster father of Krishna, along with his pregnant wife, journeyed to Mathura to pay taxes at the time when Krishna is to be born. Krishna is represented pictorially in a cow stall or shepherd's hut that corresponds to the manger, and there are shepherds, an ox, and an ass that stand around the mother as she sleeps peacefully on the couch without fear of danger. There's a massacre of the innocents. Krishna raises to life a dead son. Krishna cures a person who then pours a vessel of ointment over Krishna. His look had the power to take away sin. And now they're going to give a bunch of other scriptures from how they made Krishna like Jesus and compared him so that it was confusing. In any case, so far as India is concerned, the introduction of the Krishna cult and the development of the caste system after AD 600 helped contribute to the decay of Eastern Church missionaries. Another factor in the decline of the missionary activity of the church in the East was the growth of the spirit of compromise. Perhaps there was no formal departure from fundamental doctrines, but rather less emphasis placed on them than their importance demanded. The influence of the Church of the East on the non-Christians around it had potential power to restrain the Mongol storm about to descend on Asia. The influence of the Church of the East on the non-Christians around it, and its potential power to restrain the Mongol storm about to descend on Asia, decreased. The urgency and clearness of its message, so evident in the early centuries, had disappeared. And then it has just a brief paragraph about Buddhism and that it was the most dangerous opponent of Christianity. Buddhism's three main divisions are: first, Buddhism of the little vehicle, acknowledges there is a God but denies we can know anything about him, but today is combined with animism and devil worship. Second, Mahayana Buddhism, or Buddhism of the great vehicle, which is universalism, the larger hope. And third, there is the animistic Buddhism of Tibet. The Buddhism of China and Japan borrowed largely from Christian doctrine and even emphasized salvation by faith, of course without mention of the Savior who died for man's sin. While Christianity exerted an influence on Buddhism, Buddhism had a similar effect on Christianity. And so in countries free from Muslim deluge, such as China and Japan, Buddhism became the dominant religion and Christianity was blotted out. So that's just kind of how all these things we had heard about started to decline.